All right. Here we are. Time to learn Apache Kafka with Python. Welcome to today's workshop. I'm glad you're joining us. My name is Maddie Stratton. I work here at Aiven, and we're going to be spending some time today with some event streaming stuff with Apache Kafka using Python behind the scenes. But while we're getting ready to get started, we'll answer any questions that you have in the chat. We'll do our best. Love to chat, but let's maybe get a start in the chat. Let us know where are you joining us from, and what have you done with either Apache Kafka or Python before, so we kind of get a vibe for what people are up to. Yeah. For me, I'm from the Chicagoland area. I live in the suburbs of Chicago, and because I used to live in the city is why I don't say I live in Chicago, because you don't say you live in Chicago unless you live in the city of Chicago. And my experience with Python is getting upset that it's not Ruby. When I first started learning Python stuff, and I knew more with Ruby, and I would get into Python and get very, very frustrated because it was different, which is probably the same way that Python folks feel when they use Ruby. So, but we are, okay, Kansas City, I see we got Atlanta and Verona, so we're pretty well distributed. Also hanging out with me is my teammate Jen, who is going to be running the chat and helping provide some helpful links there, as well as might bop in the background for some questions. So okay, looks like we're getting pretty good going. So let's just do it to it, I think, right? Why are we waiting? You're like, come on, Matt, let's get to the fireworks factory. So cool. What we're gonna do overall is going to do kind of a brief introduction to what Kafka is. And when there's all sorts of different reasons you might want to learn about Kafka and you might use it. So we'll speak briefly about that a little bit about how Kafka works. But then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set ourselves up a Kafka instance so we have somewhere to work. And then we're going to go through some exercises together with some Jupyter notebooks we've put together to help with some pieces of things we can do with Kafka. So really, like I said, we're going to sit there and we're going to say, okay, what is Kafka? We'll talk about that a little bit. How do we create a managed Apache Kafka cluster? And then how are we going to use Python to securely connect to that Kafka cluster? How are we going to produce messages? And then also, can we consume them using Python? And Jen dropped a link in the chat. If you go to that link, that'll take you to, we have a thread on our forums that has a lot of any help questions you might have and the things you'll need to do to be set up. But that's okay. We're going to walk through that all together. But if you get behind, that link is going to be your helper to get yourself caught up. And again, this is the link we were just talking about. And if you like QR codes, go ahead and zap that one. If you want to pull up, maybe you want to pull up the help thread on your phone to have it next to you. I'm not here to judge your workflow, but I am here to talk about Apache Kafka. Actually do as little talking as possible. We want to do a lot of doing, and we're hoping to be pretty interactive. We also have in the chat, my another good Aiven, or not another good Kafka expert who comes from Aiven on my team, as well as Francesco, who's hanging out in the chat, and I'm sure he'll be happy to chime in when there's other questions and stuff. So hint, Francesco. So anyway, what is Apache Kafka? Let's start with Kafka. So we kind of looked and said, asked for different thoughts that people had. We've had, some folks have done a bunch with Kafka, but maybe if you've done any event streaming, not necessarily with Kafka, we'd love to hear about that. And but yeah, so what this is if we're going to dig into it and say, what exactly is this Apache Kafka thing? So Apache Kafka is an open source distributed event streaming platform. So it's important. Kafka is open source. It's licensed, distributed under the Apache 2.0 license. We love us some open source software according to open source definitions. And then when we think about that, Kafka is distributed, right? And we said it's an open source distributed platform. So Kafka is designed to scale horizontally. So when we talk about the difference of horizontal or vertical scaling. Horizontal really means we add more nodes. We take the same size of things and we make more of them. So if we're thinking about an old school Visio diagram, it's horizontal because they run across in a row. And this means we add more nodes, we add more workers, to our cluster to handle increasing volumes. So we're like, hey, we got more data. We need more. We're like, all right, well, we had 3 nodes. Now we need 4, but they're all kind of the same. And so if your organization experiences a big surge in data volume, you can add more nodes to your Kafka cluster to make sure that your capabilities remain at the speed that you're looking for, right? So we can say we have more of them. We have more workers. But then the other thing that we can do is you can scale Kafka vertically as well. And vertically is basically saying we're making those nodes more powerful. So sometimes you'll hear horizontal scaling referred to as a scale out architecture, and vertical is a scale up. And if we thought about this idea that when we're scaling it horizontally, we're saying we're adding more workers. When we scale it vertically, we're making those workers bigger. And maybe we're doing both. And then finally, the big question on this is the big part, save it for the end, is an event streaming platform. And what do we mean when we talk about it being event streaming? It's not, sometimes we talk about streaming events like this is a streaming event. We're streaming this workshop. That's not what we mean when we say event streaming. Kafka is not a competitor to Hopin or something like that. Kafka lets data move in near real time from the producers to the consumers of the information. So if we think kind of historically, when we think in a batch way, it's like we kind of get all this data into one place and then we consume it and we're bringing it, we're processing and we're reasoning about it in chunks. Whereas when we think about streaming it, it's really moving us to this near real time, getting the information to the consumer of that information, whatever service, whatever application, as quickly as possible. So basics of Kafka, right? If Kafka is based on the concept of a log that's called a topic. So you'll hear a lot about topics, right? And we events that are added into a topic are immutable. That means they can't change. They are what they are. That's it. So the events are added in an immutable way, and it's append only, right? So we're not replacing. There's no updates. We're just adding more. And so these events can only be added at the end of the log, at the end of the topic, and it's immutable. Once an event is sent to Kafka, it can't be changed. So if something changes in the reality of that event, then the producer, which is the thing that's sending it into the topic, have to submit a new event to that topic. There's no, let me go back and update that. It is all append when it comes to that, right? So, there we go. Sorry. So a producer is the process that's responsible for inserting those events into the topic. So that could be a process, could be an application, could be another data pipeline. So the producer is the thing saying, I'm going to throw this stuff into the topic. So once the data is in a Kafka topic, we have those events in there, then a consumer can start reading from it, and it's going to receive those messages in order, right? They're going to come in order. And that's the consumer. You can see the consumer is reading from that. And so the beauty of Kafka is that once a message is read from a consumer, Kafka is not going to delete it. Remember, everything is append, so it's still available for other consumers to read. And we can see the consumer reads that. And then Kafka keeps track of the offset, so it knows for each consumer, we have the multiple consumers. So Kafka knows basically what consumer has read what. It's keeping track of those pieces. So it's not going to send the same topic. It's not going to be, that knows that this particular consumer versus this other one has actually gone ahead and read that. So that's the basics of this, what we're talking about doing. So in this case, we're saying, okay, we've got a thing that happened. We've got some information. We're going to put it into this topic, and then a consumer or multiple consumers, like we said, can all pull them, and then they're all seeing the same things. So multiple ways you can run Kafka. It's open source, right? So you could download Kafka's binaries. You could run it locally. You could say, I'm going to put this on my machine and do my own thing. In this tutorial, for simplicity, we're going to use Aiven for Apache Kafka. So it's a managed service because, first of all, it's giving ourselves, there's multiple reasons we want to do that. And with with Aiven, when we think about it from a platform perspective, you are abstracting away from having to worry about how you're running that Kafka cluster, how you're managing it. Kafka can be a complex thing to manage, as a bunch of other tools. So with Aiven, overall, you've got access to the most widely used and highest performing open source data services without having to worry about running them yourselves. So you can see we're only talking about Kafka today under the event streaming side, but there's all these other services that are available to you in Aiven, um, across relational databases, data visualizations, data warehouses, time series, all this fun stuff. And this is giving you one place to worry about that, one consistent experience, and you're getting that reliability and security that you don't want to have to worry about, right? This means you don't have to worry about things like how are you doing your upgrades, being able to have near zero downtime for your Kafka maintenance or your Postgres high availability failover is really not your problem for that. So we're going to go ahead and set ourselves up a Kafka instance on Aiven. So we're going to do this today. So you can create a Kafka cluster really quickly with Aiven. We're going to do this together. So if you go to this URL, this sign up Kafka Python, Jen will drop that in the chat. You could also hit that up in the QR code, and we're going to look like something like this. So we're going to go ahead and do this together, first of all, get ourselves our Aiven account set up. So we're ready to go, and we're going to create this Kafka cluster together, because this is the cluster that we're going to then use for our Python coding, and having something to consume. So we're going to go ahead, and I'm going to say, okay, I want to go to maddie.stratton, Kafka workshop at aiven.fi. So this is, I'm sorry, I need to create an account. I already did that wrong. My apologies. Okay. So when we come up there, it says, hey, you don't have an account. Now you can use, if you want to, hey, use your Google account for your authentication method, your Microsoft account or your GitHub account. So you don't have to create a new user and password and all that fun stuff. In my particular case here, I'm just going to go ahead and create myself a new one. I'm Maddie Stratton. This is where I say, okay, I want to be Maddie Stratton at aiven.io. And then I know that is not the password that I am going to use. There we go. And then I'm going to say register with email. And what this is going to do is this is going to go ahead and it's going to shoot me an email for me to, go ahead and verify my account. We've all done these kind of fun verifications before, of course, so we don't need to sort of see how this goes. And I've gotten a URL that I can now go ahead and go to, and it will say, cool, I am being verified now at this point. Very exciting. Everyone, let me know in the chat if you're kind of following along, if you've gotten to this step. And we give it a little bit of just some quick information. And I will go ahead and say, there I go. So once we're in, now we have our overall setup for Aiven. And now I just noticed, I apologize, they changed something on me, and I'm going to have to create a new account because this put me into our Aiven organization, not my own thing. So bear with me for a second, and we'll go ahead and I will set up a new one here. In the meantime, let me know if you have any questions. All right, let me go ahead and get that authentication one there. All right, so you should end up, when I go in here, we'll say we're going to get started. Okay, how do you plan to use Aiven? Sure, this can be personal. Here's what do we know. It's going to ask, so this is the experience you would have seen now, is it would say, how do you plan to use Aiven? We can say it's personal. You need a project. I'm just going to let the default, we're going to call this one, Maddie Kafka workshop, but you could call it whatever you want. And again, I know I'm in Illinois. Okay. So just checking. Oh, so far so good. If once you are now set up in your account, we should be able to go ahead and create our Kafka service. So we could create multiple services, but in this case, we're going to want to create a Kafka one. So it's as simple. We can do this very quickly. We can just go, we can say we want an Apache Kafka service. And then one of the beautiful things with Aiven is that we can run this on pretty much any cloud. So if you have a preference to run on AWS or Google Cloud or Azure, you can pick where you want to be able to have that one. I'm going to go ahead and say I'll run mine in Google Cloud. That's fine. I'll put mine in North America over there. And then you can go ahead and you want to set this for the startup environment. We don't need a big one. Now you will have free credits to be able to use during your free trial. So running this workshop won't cost you anything. We'll go ahead and sit there and say the startup size is big enough. And then we want to give it needs a service name. And you can give this a memorable name. Don't make it too long. In this case, we can call it, I will just call it Kafka, workshop cluster. Should be fine. And then this all looks like the way I want it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and say create the service and start my trial piece of this. And at this point now, Aiven will take me through a bunch of different things in our wizard to set things up the way that we might want to have them configured. We're not going to really worry about getting any of this information set up first. So the couple things, though, that we want to figure out, we're going to need to know a couple things so that we can make our secure connection. So when you talk about securing the connection, we're using SSL or SASL. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about doing with a secure connection with SSL. So here on this first configuration, when statement part up here, it says, hey, what do we want to do? So we're going to need to know a couple things. So we need to know the URI to the service. This is it's either this URI that we're going to use to connect. It's either the list of the Bootstrap servers like Kafka servers, or in the case of Aiven, it's the URI that would be used to discover them. So on your in this screen here, you'll see where this service URI is. You can go ahead and you'll want to copy that off somewhere where you'll have it available to you in a few minutes. And then the other thing that we're going to need is we need the SSL certificates that we'll use for the secure connection. And there's 3 certificates that will be used in this, and we can download them from the Aiven console right here. So we can see you're going to need an access key, an access certificate, and a CA certificate. So there's a couple ways you can either copy the whole each cert to your clipboard, but what's the easiest thing is there's a download button here, and if you just click download for each of them, they'll download them locally to you. Just make sure you keep track of where your downloads go, because we're going to need these in just a second. So if we can go here now, we can say we're going to go back to our service overview. We can see this is yet another way we would have been able to pull these same pieces down. So that's got ourselves, we're ready. We've got our Kafka side of the world ready to go. Now what we want to do is we're going to get our Python notebooks that we're going to use. So to make it easier to understand how to interact with Kafka using Python, we've created a series of Jupyter notebooks. And there's a couple ways that these could be accessed. If you're running Docker locally, you can use a setup to get these Jupyter notebooks going, but that's getting everybody's Docker going is not going to be the easiest thing in the world. So instead, we're using a service called Gitpod. And Gitpod is basically letting us run a development environment completely inside of our browser. So, and this means that we've already got it set up for Jupyter notebooks, all of this stuff. So you'll be able to follow along without leaving your browser, anything you need. So if you go ahead and go to this URL, we don't have in this particular, we haven't set it up for a GitHub code space. I see the question that Jay has there. In the future, we might think about having a way where they can both, where we just haven't set them up for both. This should theoretically work just as well in code spaces as Gitpod. This is just the one that we set up was with Gitpod. It's the same principle, but yeah, it's a really good point. And as well, if you're familiar with GitHub code spaces, it's the same theory there. So if we're going to go to that URL, I'll go ahead and share my screen. So it's going to say, okay, so if you already have a Gitpod account, you know how this stuff works, then you probably fired right in. If this is brand new to you, we're going to have to go ahead and get signed in, and you might have to create an account that's connected to your GitHub account. So you'll go to this sign up page. It'll kind of look like this. I'll say continue with GitHub, and it's gonna open up and ask me to authorize and which GitHub user I want to use. I need to be logged into there, so I'm gonna go ahead. You're not seeing it's in a pop up window that popped up, and I said, who do I want to be? And apparently, if we want to, earn more credits, we're not going to do that. We're just going to say the 10-hour setup, the basic setup is completely fine for what we want to do. And keep it as your basic editor of VS Code. You can set your theme however you like it. We're going to say continue. And then I work in whatever, and I'm going to doing it for work. That looks great. How long is ranging? Or I don't know. Sounds good. Why am I kidding? Because why not? Right. Okay. We'll go through. And then you'll see it says, okay, we want to create this new workspace. That link that you went should prompt it to look like this. We're going to say, go ahead and fire that up. So I'm going to take a second just sort of to check in. Everyone should eventually be getting something like this. I see a question in the chat from Michael, who's a longtime Aiven Kafka user. Says, we'd like to see a good way to publish the contents into Kafka without iterating through each record, but appearing in Kafka's individual records. I think that's a great question. I'm going to tag that one to Francesco in the chat while we move along, because he might have some thoughts on that. And if not, we know how we can maybe follow up on this as well and get a little bit more information. So once we are into if you have, and we'll take a second to check in to make sure everyone's kind of gotten to the step that we're at here. This again should look just like Visual Studio Code, nothing too fancy. And yes, I will make my fonts bigger so that we can see a little bit better. We don't need this. So if we take a look at our oops, let me just. So the first thing that we need to do is we'll notice you have a directory called SSL certs. So we need to get our certificates that we downloaded from Aiven into here, so that way our app is, our notebooks are going to know how to connect to that. So the way you do that, you can if you just right click here, and you can see on the folder, the SSL certs folder, I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to say upload. And then I'm going to go ahead into my downloads and I'm going to find the 3 certificates. And of course, because I've downloaded them, their names are incorrect. So I'm going to rename them, because when I downloaded it, it appended a number to it. So we want, a ca.pem, a service.cert. If you keep your downloads directory more organized than I do, you may not have had this problem. So, but just make sure, so that you should end up seeing 3 files in there: a ca.pem, a service.cert, and a service.key. And that's going to take us to our next step, which is to go ahead and get started. And the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to talk about how are we going to produce data to a topic. So to do this, we are going to go under notebooks. We have a bunch of Jupyter notebooks that are different things we can do with Kafka, with Python. We're going to start with the first one, which here is this one called produce. And so if we click on this, this is going to go ahead and we also don't need my terminal here. I can get rid of this. I also might need to make this just a little bit small. Let's get this so we can, I'm going to go ahead and maybe collapse this person. Okay. So in this notebook, we're going to see how do we produce messages to a Kafka topic. Like I said, if you remember, we're basically going to create these messages, put them into that log. So we have our certificates. We've put them into the SSL directory. We need to know our host name and port, which we've been able to obtain from the Aiven console. And just as a reminder, if we were to go back and look at that, I can see here's my host name, here is my port, right? So I'll go ahead and copy that one. And if I go back here, so in this first part of the notebook, we're going to go ahead and put in the host name and port. The first thing that we want to do, you'll notice up here, because we're running a Jupyter notebook, we have to pick the kernel that we want the notebook to use. So if you'll pick select kernel, we want to go ahead and say install the suggested extensions for Python and Jupyter. If we all do that together, that's fine. I don't care. So we'll let it go ahead and install that extension. This is going to install all the things that are good for Python and for Jupyter, and that'll get us to the place where we want to go. Again, if you were running this in your own VS Visual Studio, your own IDE, you would probably have these things already in place, but this is getting started. So now it says, okay, which kernel are we going to use? And we want to choose from our different Python environments we have available, and we'll see there's multiple. In this case, we want to use Python 3.10.12. Don't use the Python 3.12. Use the Python 3.10.12. That works better with the libraries that we'll be using. And we can see that's there. So now I have my stuff. So the first thing, again, if you remember, we said we were going to we grabbed the host name, and we will update that here. So in our placeholder in this little box here, I'm going to paste in my host name, and then I also need to know the port. And I had looked up and I saw that my port is 20,342. So we're going to go ahead and replace that there. And now that that's set, if I go ahead and execute the cell, that's just going to set those parameters for me. And then the next piece is that we need to have certain and now it's told me, okay, all these things have popped up. That's fine. We can get rid of them. We are also going to, this is what, now we also need the Kafka Python library that we're going to use in this tutorial. And we'll do that with a pip install. And because we're in a Jupyter notebook, we can just, the same thing at this little execute button over here that runs is going to go ahead and run that command for us. And we'll see that it's installed the packages that we're going to need, the libraries that we're going to need. And we can see we got this little, if you're being successful, you're seeing a green check mark with how long it took to run. So when we think about it, so once we have all our pieces in part, now it's time to actually do some things. So what we are going to do here is we're going to configure the Kafka producer. This is the piece that's producing the topic, producing the events, producing the things into the topic. And so the first thing is this is just configured, and this is, I believe, is we've got there's nothing we need to do other than that exists. But now we want, but you can see the configuration of that is talking about the different configuration that comes into play. Remember, we said, okay, what are the Bootstrap servers? We pulled in that host name and that port. We know we're using SSL. It's telling it where the service certificates exist, and that we're using the JSON serializers. So in this section, we're going to be pushing a message into a topic called pizzas. So we're producing producing data to a topic named pizzas. So either you have to have the topic created so it can have somewhere to go, or we need to have the Kafka auto create topics enable configured, which I am looking to double check where we set that. The other, but we can go ahead and we can also create it manually. So if we are back in our setup for our Kafka cluster, we had our overview, and then we can go here and we can look at the topics. And at this point, we don't have any topics. So we want to create a topic that's going to go in there. Apache, scroll until the end. Thank you. Let me go back. Here we go. So this is, yep, under the advanced configs, if we go to the Kafka auto create topics enable, we would want to say that should be enabled. So again, as a reminder, that was if we went to the overview and scrolled to the bottom under advanced configuration, configure, and we went to add a configuration option, we added this one. So that will now say that that when we create a topic, if it doesn't already exist, Kafka will create that topic. So the flush function also is what makes sure. So if we look at it, we're saying, okay, under producer.produce, we're saying the topic is pizzas, and we're going to put in with the values of the name is Francesco and the pizza is margarita, and then running producer.flush is ensuring that the topic's set. So we have all of our pieces here. We should be able to go ahead and execute this cell. Good point. Francesco makes a very good point in the chat, which is automatically creating topics is totally good for a tutorial or a workshop or just demoing or playing around. Probably not a great idea in production because that's how you probably end up with a bunch of topics that have typos in them and such. So we're going to go ahead and execute this cell. It's going to go ahead and create that, and we can see that the message was sent to into our topic. And again, if we go back and look under, if we were in our cluster, if we click on topics, we now see there is a topic called pizza. So it did create that one for us, or sorry, topic called pizzas. And if we even click in the messages, oh, no, that's not what I wanted to do. We're going to go read the messages in another way, but we can see that it was able to go ahead and create that topic. And we have one message in there. Now we might want to produce some more messages in there. So we've already put one in there that was for Francesco, and the pizza he likes is margarita, but we're going to add in Adele with Hawaiian pizza and Mark with chocolate pizza. And so again, if we go ahead and run this execute this cell, we will see it's going to go ahead and add in those two messages as well. So this is fundamentally getting us the ability to, yes, and if we enable the Kafka REST API, we can view the message in the console. I just realized, I apologize, I was sharing the wrong screen. So to reiterate what we did this first step, we executed that, put that one in there, and I also ran this one. I ran this cell, which is what added Adele and Mark's record as well. And so now, if I were to go back into here and I look at my pizzas and I want to view them, it's like Francesco mentioned, if you want to view the messages through Aiven's console of this, we just have to enable Kafka's REST API, which you may or may not do in a production environment for purposes of our demo. Sure, let's do that so that we can see our messages. So we're going to go ahead and say, fetch those messages. We should see 3 of them. And there they are, right? But we'll go ahead and decode them from their base 64 so we can see that the messages were in there. And even if we look at the offset, we can see, remember that they go in immutably and they go in the order they did. So we can see the first one was Francesco, followed by Adele, followed by Mark. And we can see all of the details for those. So we're able to write those messages into our topic. So that's pretty exciting. So let's do something fun, and maybe let's consume the data on these, and we want to consume data from a topic. So now for this one, we need to go back and we need to open up notebook 2. Now I recommend we're going to keep notebook 1 also open because that's going to help us. And so I'm just going to split my screen here so we can see the 2 of them next to each other. So this was, and now we can see this is the second notebook. This is consume. So we need to do a few things that are going to sound familiar because these notebooks are independent of each other. So it seems redundant. We're going to go reconfigure this again, but they Jupyter notebooks don't know about each other. So we have to go back and select the kernel again, but that's easy enough. We can see it's still Python 3.10.12. we didn't have to install the extensions or anything this time. So that's fine. And then similarly, again, we need to go ahead and pull up our host name and our port. And one of the nice things about having this right next to it is that I can just copy paste it from there. And we know that that port is going to be 20342. Cool. Let's go ahead and execute that. And then again, we still need to get those libraries installed, that pip install, because it's inside of the environment that we're talking about for this particular notebook. But they were already kind of satisfied. And now we want to create our consumer. So the consumer looks very similar to how we created the producer, right? Almost exactly the same, except that we're creating the object down here, because we still are pulling out what's the server, what's the client ID, what is the group ID that we're going to use to this, and then we're using SSL, same certificates, same pieces and parts. So we want to consume messages. Now we're reading messages that came from the pizzas topic, and we're consuming data from that topic. So the topic needs to exist already, whether it has messages in it or not. So if we did not have the pizzas topic, we would get an error when we try to read from it because it doesn't exist. So we can see, okay, it's going to subscribe to the pizzas topic and bring those up. So now if we go ahead and say, let's go ahead and read these messages, we are getting a name error. Consumer is not defined. All right, what am I missing here? Oh, did I not? Consumer is not defined. Anybody want to know why? Can you guess? It's because we did not run the actual configuration of the consumer. I thought I did. So now, if we were to run it again, we should actually have some better success, because Python's like, Maddie, you tried to pull up this object called consumer, and that is not a thing, by the way. We're going ahead and reading these messages. Yes, and this continues to run until we interrupt it, and then we should be able to get. So, like I said, it's looking for a keyboard interrupt, which, if I'm remembering how yeah, the consumer starts. Okay, fair enough. Francesco, remind me how I send a keyboard interrupt into the actual cell that's running. Interrupt button at the top. I'm sure I'm. Oh, there it is. It's right in front of me. Sorry about this. Has been one of those. So shutdown requested, exiting. We're able to read, and now if we, like Francesco said, so if it doesn't go back in time, so it's already read those messages. But then if we were to go back and push some more messages into there, then the consumer is going to pick those up. So if I go ahead and push these, that's going to add some more messages. We should see that there are messages in here that weren't before. So for example, we can see that I've added more. We now have more messages in here. So if we go back and we run our consumer again, oh, the consumer was closed. So I guess it means we have to open it again. And now that is going to be reading those new messages that we have just added to our piece. How are we getting caught up? Has anyone else been able to experiment with this? Have given it a try? The things that they've touched. So yes, and like Jay asked the question in the chat, said if you produce messages while the consumer is running, will they be picked up? So those would also be picked up, even if I hadn't interrupted it. We would see it's only going to pick up the ones that had already run through. So I think we can go ahead and get a little salty here. We've got a little bit more time. If we wanted to think about a couple other things, we have a few other notebooks that we have some activities we can try in there. So if we were to take a look at, can I push some more messages? Sure, let's push some more messages. All right. So the consumer is up, it's chugging away, and we're going to go ahead and say let's produce some more messages. So we'll run this again. So now we actually saw those messages come up down there. I see what was happening. So in the return of before, and then likewise, same thing. If we want to run it again, we'll see it pick them up again. And again, there's no reason I can't be fancy and say, okay, you're like, well, that's fine, Maddie, but you keep showing me Adele and all these other people. But let's go ahead and say, let's add another one. And we're going to go ahead and add pizzas. We'll put this under, we'll have a new person, and we're going to call this person Maddie. And the pizza that Maddie uses is tavern style. So if I go ahead and push this one, we should see we have all these new pieces and parts. So ta-da. From that, you can see that we're able to produce and then also consume our pieces and parts in there. And then I would say I'm just checking on one little thing. What is tavern style pizza? So this is a good question. It is the true Chicago pizza. So tavern style, when you think of Chicago pizza, you might be thinking of deep dish pizza. But tavern style is the real pizza that we eat in Chicago. We eat deep dish like on special occasions and when you all come to visit us. But tavern style is like a thin crust with the cheese to the edge, and it's cut party style in small squares. So now you know, and that you should definitely try tavern style pizza when you were in Chicago. It's much preferred. And we're going to have a little bit of a special guest. So Francesco is going to come in. Yeah, exactly. Deep dish pizza is not really pizza. It's its own thing, right? It's like how. So Francesco is gonna pop in as well, and we can talk a little bit more about Kafka and maybe some more experiments and things we can do. So give him 1 second to there he is, and here is Francesco.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, you sound great.
Okay, so I believe we entered the perfect example of the little trick that the defaults in Kafka do for a consumer. Because basically what we were saying is the fact that with all the defaults of the consumer starts consuming from Kafka from the point in time that it attaches to Kafka. So what you did, Maddie, is before you produced and then you consumed.
Mm-hmm.
So the consumer, since it attached after the data was produced, it didn't go back in time. But then when you start producing again while the consumer is up and running, you see all the data. This is the default behavior, and is what a lot of people were starting with Kafka will face, that you produce some data, you don't see it. Mm-hmm. There is a parameter called, can't remember, the offset, the default offset, where you can tell that a consumer will start reading from the beginning of a topic, but the default is from now. So it will only start reading from the existing point in time when it connects.
That makes a lot of sense, because you don't necessarily want to pull things that existed before you were trying to think about them that way.
Well, it depends what you're trying to achieve with a consumer. Most of the times you're okay in reading from now on. Sometimes you want to go back to the beginning of the topic. Sometimes you just want to go back to a specific offset or point in time and start parsing from there. All this is achievable with some consumer settings.
Very cool. Do we want to? We've got some time. I know before we haven't dug as many into these other notebooks. Should we kind of go a little YOLO mode and see what these other ones do?
Yeah.
Okay. So that was consumed. So this next one is producing a partitioned topic. So in the case of and Francesca, you want to why would we have multiple partitions in our topic?
I believe partitions are the way that allow you to parallelize the load in Kafka. So a topic is just kind of, if you are familiar with databases, is like a table in a database. A database table can be created by multiple partitions that will store a subset of the data. This is used in the database world to spread the load across different, parts of the database instead of storing everything in just one huge table. The same applies to Kafka, where you can split a topic into different partitions. So on the producer side, you can possibly define the partition wisely by using the key of the message. And you can define, for example, I want to send all the orders for pizza for Chicago to one specific partition, all the orders for all the pizza orders for the city of Milan in another partition. On the consumer side, this also allows consumers to read in parallel the data, because if you start two consumers, one will attach to the Chicago partition, the other one will attach to the Milan partition, and they will be able to consume in parallel the events that are coming. It's worth saying that the number of partition is the limiting factor for the number of parallel or concurrent consumers that you can have. You can not have more concurrent consumers than partitions.
Got it. So it's a scaling scenario when we were doing it. So, okay. So it's saying we're saying we're going to create a new topic called pizza partitioned. And like you said, you can set this up a couple different ways. We're using a custom partitioner in this case. So we're saying we have, I got ahead of myself here. Sorry. Let's go back to the first things we need to do when we go ahead and run this. I don't know why I scrolled so far down. I'm going to go ahead and steal my host name and port from over here, which we're getting very good at doing.
Mm-hmm.
We'll ensure that we have our libraries. Easy enough. And then now we're going to create a new topic. So this is where it's partitioned. So we're saying, okay, I see what happens here, right? So we say, okay, we're going to keep making a new topic. We want it to have two partitions, and how we want to have that replicated.
Yeah, I
and
believe
then, go ahead.
that's we need to use the admin client in this case, because by default the topics are created with one partition in our case. In the case of the default Aiven for Apache Kafka service, it's all default parameters that you can change in the Aiven for Apache Kafka service if you want. But now what we did is we created a new topic with the admin client that has two partitions. And even if we are specifying one as replication factor, I believe Aiven enforces you to have at least two as replication factor, which dictates how many copies of that topic you have across the cluster for high availability.
Yep, you can see I just ran that. Now we have the pizza partition. Again, to your point, it's still saying the replication is 2, right? The minimum, as we had looked for. So we can see it's created that topic for us. We go ahead and run that one, and now we're going to go ahead and create our producer, which our producer is the same thing we did before. We'll go ahead and just run that one. And now we're going and saying we want to push the data into that. So we're saying this message is going into partition 0, and Adele is going into partition 1. But other than that, and you're saying based on how we do our business logic here is, again, we may be having specific partitions for specific cases when we specify to them.
Yeah, by default, the partitioning is handled by the key of a message.
Okay.
And Kafka will ensure that messages having the same key will land in the same partitions.
Got it.
However, you can do as we are doing here. I'm saying which partition I want to push data to, if I need it. Or I can, if I don't need a specific partition, I can basically use kind of round robin. Is a little bit more sticky than a pure round robin. But if I don't specify the key, Kafka will assign the message or the set of messages that are included in a batch to a specific partition.
Got it. Okay, and then the same thing. So if I go ahead and these are
just before that, if you open the 4A consume partition and 4B consume partition, both will require you to copy and paste the host name and port in
go ahead
them.
and get those. Go ahead and get those. Oh, they're also going to require me to do that. So we'll go ahead and create our go away. And we'll do the same thing on consume partition B. And again, I believe this is not necessary each time because I think it's
no, probably not. But like we put it because you can run.
Oh no, for sure. Yeah, I was saying for people following along.
Yep.
Okay, so now if we go back here now, so now this is the first. This is your partition A.
Yep.
So we're gonna configure a consumer. And is there anything? Doesn't look like there's anything in here that's any different than the way we would. The initial configuration is the same as any other consumer.
Yeah. So one thing is interesting here. If you check the group ID, it's called pizzaioli. Basically, the group ID is how you say this application or these two tasks are part of the same application. It's basically related to the concept of Kafka consumer group. So it's how you say, okay, these two consumers are part of the same application, so they will want to read all the messages once, but they don't want to read duplicated messages. So if you see the consumer, both consumers, the 4A and 4B, are part of the same group ID. So if you run this piece of code, you will create a consumer, and then the piece of code below will allow you to start the consumer, and this is where you assign that to a specific partition.
Got it. So now we want to. So again, as we remember, if we can
code, we are using the consumer.assign, and we are saying we assign the consumer to a topic partition of pizza partition a topic partition 0. This is where we are basically saying we want only to consume from a partition. We could also rely on the fact that we just define two consumers as part of the same consumer group, and Kafka will assign one of the partitions to us.
Okay. So again, and as we talked about, to catch up again, we're not seeing anything come in here because of that offset, but we will see new messages come in. So if we go back to we want to create some more, produce some more messages into there, we'll go ahead and produce those. And we should see in our consumption over here, we see only one because of the two, only one came to this partition. And if we had the other notebook running, we would see the one that went to there, but I think we can assume that happened and was fine. So that is exciting stuff. Thanks for popping in. We're gonna bring ourselves to a little bit of bear with me here. So that brings us to our wrap up here. So what did we learn today? We learned actually even more than this. We learned about what Kafka is, how to create that cluster as a place to start. And in Python, how do we securely connect to our Kafka cluster? How do we produce messages and consume them? We also even learned how we can split those across partitions to have even more effect. So we'd love to get your thoughts on this workshop. Very quick feedback form. Jen will drop this link in the chat. And we'd love to hear what you have to say, Francesco. If you figured it out, cool. And as well, if you happen to be in the London area next week, we have our great event, Aiven Live London. That's on 12 December from 8:30 until a little bit in the afternoon. We've got a bunch of great sessions happening there, talking about scaling of data solutions, doing image recognition at scale with Postgres. Francesco, who you just got to meet, is going to be presenting there, as well as a bunch of folks, not only just from Aiven, but also from Volt and Reveneer and Dojo and all sorts of things. It's a free event. Would love to have you join us if you're in the London area. So go ahead and check that out. And then finally, we got just a bunch of other things. If you want to find out about upcoming workshops that we have, Jen will be dropping these links in the chat. But we run these workshops on Wednesdays. This one you joined in today was about learning Apache Kafka with Python. We've had workshops we run about data persistence using Spring, workshops around OpenSearch and JavaScript, around creating and configuring applications for continuous delivery, all sorts of fun stuff. Go check out the upcoming workshops page to find out all the workshops that are coming up in the next month or so. We have our forums. If you join our community, not just to talk about Aiven, but to talk about open source data infrastructure in general, you can subscribe to our newsletter. And finally, we also have the Aiven Developer Center, which is full of articles and tutorials around not just Kafka, but operational databases, relational databases, visualization, all sorts of fun things like that. So thanks for being a part of the workshop today, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. And we hope we see you at an upcoming workshop as well. And don't forget to give us some feedback.